The American dream, it turns out, is a perfectly manicured lawn, a 2-car garage, and a 3-inch grass height rule enforced by a woman who wields a clipboard like a weapon of mass destruction. I didn't know that last part when we signed the papers. All I saw was paradise. "Look at it, Sarah," I said, my chest puffed out with the kind of pride only a first-time homeowner can feel. We were standing on our new front porch, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over Maple Creek Estates. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and subtle suburban desperation. No more shared walls. No more listening to the guy in 3B practice the bagpipes at 2 in the morning. Just peace and fescue grass. Lots and lots of fescue grass. Sarah, my infinitely more practical and grounded partner, leaned against me, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's beautiful, Alex. But you do remember the beige-only rule for exterior trim, right? And the mandated distance between decorative shrubs?" "Details, details." I waved a dismissive hand. "A small price to pay for tranquility. We've made it. We're real adults now. We probably have to start talking about our 401ks at dinner parties." She laughed, a sound that made the whole ridiculous mortgage worth it. "Let's not get carried away. First, we have to survive the HOA. Ah, the HOA, the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. On paper, it was a benign entity designed to preserve property values and community harmony. In practice, it was the personal fiefdom of one Carol Ann Miller, a woman who seemed to have retired from a long, fulfilling career in making everyone else's life a little less enjoyable. We got our first taste of the Carol regime on day 3. We were still surrounded by boxes, debating the merits of putting the couch against the long wall, when I saw her through the bay window. She was power walking, of course, her limbs pumping with terrifying efficiency. She wore a visor, a pastel polo shirt tucked into crisp khaki shorts, and on her arm, the infamous clipboard. She stopped in front of our new next-door neighbor's lawn, a place inhabited by a cheerful-looking fellow named Bob, who had an extensive collection of garden gnomes. Carol produced a tape measure from a holster on her belt. I am not making that up. A tape measure holster. She knelt with the grim precision of a crime scene investigator and measured the tallest gnome, a particularly jolly-looking one with a fishing rod. After a moment, she scribbled furiously on her clipboard, tore off a sheet, and tucked it neatly under Bob's welcome mat. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, coming to stand beside me. "Did she just give a gnome a ticket?" "I think she did," I replied, a cold dread seeping into my newfound suburban bliss. "I think that gnome is in violation of Ordinance 7B, Lawn Ornamentation Height and Whimsy Restrictions." Sarah patted my arm. "Don't worry," she said, though her eyes were wide. "We don't have any gnomes. We'll be fine. Just keep the grass cut and the trash cans out of sight." For a few weeks, she was right. We were fine. We settled in, learned the arcane recycling schedule, and mastered the art of the polite, non-committal wave to our neighbors. I, Alex, a 32-year-old graphic designer who once considered black jeans and a band t-shirt to be business casual, was becoming a model suburbanite. I even bought a leaf blower. I felt like a fraud, but a comfortable, well-hydrated fraud with excellent curb appeal. The piece was real. The bagpipes were a distant, traumatic memory. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a coupon book for a local pizzeria and a bill. It wasn't the usual junk mail. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and embossed with the Maple Creek Estates logo, a single, sterile-looking maple leaf. It felt less like a piece of mail and more like a summons. "What's that?" Sarah asked from the kitchen, where she was attempting to decipher the instructions for a new air fryer. "It's from the overlords," I said, slitting the envelope open with a butter knife. Inside was the monthly community newsletter, the Maple Creek Chronicle. It was a single sheet of paper, printed on both sides, detailing upcoming community events like asphalt resealing on cul-de-sac C, and a reminder about the approved species of seasonal flowers. But the lead story, front and center, was a special announcement penned by Carol herself. Her author photo was a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The headline read, "A proactive step towards preserving neighborhood harmony." "Oh, this can't be good," I muttered. I read her words aloud. In an effort to maintain the aesthetic unity and tranquil apolitical atmosphere of our community, the board has unanimously passed Bylaw 11F. Effective immediately, all political signage of any kind is strictly prohibited from display on any property within Maple Creek Estates. This includes, but is not limited to, signs for candidates, parties, political movements, or ballot initiatives. We trust this will ensure our shared spaces remain a haven from the divisive discourse of the outside world. I finished and looked up at Sarah. The air fryer manual lay forgotten on the counter. "She can't do that, can she?" Sarah asked. "What about freedom of speech?" "I don't know," I said, reading it again. The language was so corporate, so clinical. Aesthetic unity, divisive discourse. It was the kind of jargon people use when they're doing something awful but want to sound reasonable about it. Here's the thing. I wasn't even planning on putting up a sign. I'm the kind of person who follows politics closely, gets angry about it in the privacy of my own home, and then quietly votes. I had never, in my life, felt the need to turn my lawn into a billboard for my democratic preferences. But this was different. This wasn't about politics. It was about control. It was about Carol and her tape measure and her clipboard extending her reign from the height of our gnomes to the content of our thoughts. It was the principle of the thing. She was telling me what I couldn't do on my own property, the property I was paying a small fortune for every single month. A quiet, rebellious spark I thought had been extinguished by mortgage applications, and trips to Home Depot flickered to life in my chest. "I hate this," I said, crumpling the newsletter in my fist. "I hate the condescending tone. I hate the smarmy sign-off. Yours in community unity, Carol. I hate all of it." I started pacing the living room, a low-grade fury building inside me. It's a power trip, that's all it is. She wants perfectly uniform beige houses with perfectly uniform green lawns inhabited by perfectly uniform people who don't have any messy opinions. "Okay, take a breath, Trotsky," Sarah said, picking up the crumpled ball of paper and smoothing it out. "It's annoying, but what are you going to do? Put up a sign and get a huge fine?" "No," I said, stopping my pacing. "Of course not. I'm not going to put up a political sign." I slumped onto the couch, defeated, and pulled out my phone to scroll through the endless void of the internet, hoping to numb my righteous indignation with cat videos. I scrolled past news articles, past ads for things I'd talked about 5 minutes ago, and then I saw it. A newly released trailer for an upcoming blockbuster. 2 of cinema's most iconic giants, roaring at each other on top of an aircraft carrier. The title card flashed in epic, fiery letters, Godzilla vs. Kong. I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen. An idea, a terrible, beautiful, magnificently stupid idea began to blossom in my mind. It was an idea so childish, so pedantic, so perfectly, maliciously compliant that it made my breath catch in my throat. I looked from my phone to the smug, self-satisfied face of Carol in the newsletter, then back to my phone. A slow grin spread across my face. Sarah, who had been watching me, narrowed her eyes. She knew my brain. She knew its twisted, devious pathways. "Oh no," she said, her voice a low warning. "I know that look. That's your I'm about to spend 3 days photoshopping our cat's head onto historical figures. Look. Alex, don't. But it was too late. The gears were grinding. The machine was in motion. Carol wanted to ban political signs to avoid divisive discourse. Fine, I'd give her the most monstrous, earth-shattering, non-political campaign this neighborhood had ever seen. "Honey," I said, my voice filled with a newfound purpose. "How do you feel about giant monsters?" My home office, which was really just a glorified closet with a desk and an overpriced chair, became my campaign headquarters. For the next 3 hours, fueled by coffee and pure, unadulterated spite, I was in my element. The rhythmic click-clack of my keyboard and the hum of my computer were the sounds of democracy in action. Or, more accurately, the sounds of a man with too much time on his hands and professional-grade design software. Sarah poked her head in around 10. "Are you fomenting a revolution in there?" "A counterinsurgency," I corrected, not taking my eyes off the screen. "I'm exploiting a loophole in the tyrant's decree. This requires precision, finesse." "It looks like you're choosing a font." "A campaign's font is its soul, Sarah. Do I go with something strong and impactful for Godzilla, like a heavy sans serif, or something more primal and organic for Kong? These are the questions that define a movement." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Just try to get some sleep. You have that client meeting tomorrow." "They'll have to wait. The fate of Maple Creek hangs in the balance." By midnight, I had my masterpieces. They were beautiful, simple, elegant, and designed to be as infuriatingly inoffensive as possible. Using the standard 18x 24-inch dimensions of a typical yard sign, I created 2 distinct designs. The first was for the incumbent king of the monsters. It featured a deep, oceanic blue background with a stark, powerful silhouette of Godzilla's iconic dorsal fins cutting through the frame. Below the image, in a bold, authoritative font called Impact, the text read, "Godzilla. 25. Restoring order through atomic breath." It was perfect. Vaguely political sounding, but ultimately meaningless in the context of a suburban cul-de-sac. The second was for the Challenger. I chose an earthy, jungle-brown color scheme. A silhouette of King Kong beating his chest stood proudly above the slogan. For him, I chose a slightly more rounded, approachable font. The text, Kong, 25, a leader with heart and big hands. It implied a grassroots man of the people, ape of the people? Sensibility. I sent them to the 24-hour print shop down the road, the kind of place that mostly handles emergency bachelor party t-shirts and last-minute business presentations. Then, under the cloak of a moonless night, I drove to pick them up. The guy behind the counter, a teenager with tired eyes, didn't even blink. He just handed me the 2 corrugated plastic signs and my receipt. I felt like a spy retrieving microfilm. Back home, I grabbed a mallet from the garage. The cool night air was filled with the sound of crickets. It was the perfect atmosphere for a little light treason. With a few soft, satisfying thunks, I planted the signs. I put Godzilla on the left side of our walkway and Kong on the right, giving them equal footing. They looked glorious under the faint glow of our porch light. 2 silent titans vying for the soul of my front lawn. I stood back to admire my work, feeling a thrill of rebellion I hadn't experienced since I'd tried to start a petition in high school to get soda machines in the library. This felt infinitely more important. I slept the sound, peaceful sleep of the just. The next morning, I was strategically positioned by the bay window with a mug of coffee, waiting. Right on schedule, at 7:15 a.m., the Carol Comet appeared, rounding the corner on her morning power walk. She was a blur of pastel and determination. As she approached our house, her pace began to slow. Her head, which had been fixed straight ahead, slowly swiveled towards my lawn. She stopped, dead in her tracks. It was a thing of beauty to witness. Her face went through the 5 stages of HOA grief. First, denial. A slight head tilt, as if her eyes were malfunctioning. Second, anger. The tightening of her jaw, the narrowing of her eyes. Third, bargaining. She looked from one sign to the other, as if trying to understand their logic. Fourth, depression. Her shoulders slumped, a flicker of pure, world-weary exhaustion. And finally, fifth, acceptance. No, wait, that wasn't it. It was fury. Pure, unadulterated, clipboard-shaking fury. Her power walk transformed into a power march, each step pounding the pavement with righteous indignation as she made a beeline for my front door. I took a deep, calming sip of coffee. Showtime. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid, stabbing succession. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong! I opened the door with a pleasant smile. Carol, good morning. Lovely day for a walk, isn't it? She was practically vibrating. She bypassed the pleasantries entirely, pointing a trembling finger at my lawn. What? She seethed. Is the meaning of this? The meaning of what? I asked, feigning ignorance. I took another slow sip of my coffee. The signs, Alex, she snapped. The new rule. We just sent out the newsletter. It explicitly forbids political signs. Oh, these, I said, looking out at the signs as if noticing them for the first time. Right. I can see how there might be some confusion for the uninitiated, but you see, Carol, these aren't political. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. They have slogans. They have a campaign year on them. One of them is campaigning on a platform of atomic breath. Correct, I said, nodding gravely. A very divisive issue in the monster community, but not, you'll note, in the human one. To my knowledge, neither Godzilla nor King Kong is registered with the Federal Election Commission. They are not affiliated with the Democratic, Republican, or any other political party. They are, in fact, giant, fictional monsters. Carol's face was turning a fascinating shade of magenta. She was sputtering, trying to form a coherent sentence. But it's a mockery. It's making a mockery of the rules. On the contrary, I said, leaning against the doorframe, the picture of calm. I believe I am following the rule to the letter. The bylaw prohibits political signs. These are cinematic signs. I'm simply a passionate film buff, encouraging civic engagement around an important upcoming cultural event. Think of me as a patron of the arts. She was flummoxed. I could see the gears turning in her head, searching for the specific bylaw, the subclause, the footnote that would give her the power to smite me where I stood, but there was nothing. I had built my fortress on the bedrock of pedantry, and its walls were unbreachable. She finally drew herself up to her full 5'4" height. I am going to consult the board, she declared, her voice low and menacing. We will be reviewing Bylaw 7C regarding lawn ornamentation and Bylaw 9A, the Community Harmony Clause. You can expect a formal notice. You do that, I said cheerfully. Have a wonderful day, Carol. I closed the door gently, my heart pounding with adrenaline. I leaned my back against it, a massive grin spreading across my face. From the kitchen, Sarah's voice called out. So, how'd it go with your new best friend? I think she's warming up to me, I said. Round 1 goes to the nerd with a printer. I walked over to the window and looked out at my 2 monster candidates, standing tall in the morning sun. This was just the beginning. The primary was over. It was time to prepare for the general election. And I had a feeling it was going to be a long, brutal campaign. My small act of defiance did not go unnoticed. The signs became a local phenomenon almost overnight. At first, it was subtle. I'd see people slow their cars down as they drove past, the drivers pointing. Then, the walkers started to alter their routes to include our street. I'd be watering the petunias, another requirement of model suburban living, and I'd hear snippets of conversation. I don't know. Godzilla has experience, but Kong's ground game is undeniable. Yeah, but what about his foreign policy? Skull Island is notoriously isolationist. It was glorious. I was no longer just Alex, the new guy in 112 Maple Drive. I was the monster guy. My lawn was a polling station. The neighborhood kids were my most vocal supporters. A group of them set up a focus group on the sidewalk one afternoon, loudly debating the candidate's merits. A little girl of about 7 declared she was Team Godzilla because he can swim and he has a cool laser. A boy in a superhero t-shirt countered that King Kong was better because he's fluffy. These were the political analysts of our time. Dave, the dad from across the street, became my unofficial campaign manager. He was a big, jovial guy who worked in IT and clearly appreciated a well-executed bit of chaos. Every morning, as he left for work, he'd roll down his window and shout his allegiance. "The polls are looking good for the big ape today, Alex," or "Don't let the media's anti-lizard bias get you down." Of course, not everyone was amused. I saw Carol's allies, a small cabal of equally stern-looking women, walking past in a tight cluster, whispering and taking notes. One of them, a woman I mentally nicknamed Deputy Mildred, was caught taking pictures of my lawn with her phone, hiding behind a strategically planted azalea bush. The battle lines were being drawn in the fescue grass of Maple Creek Estates. My initial victory against Carol had been sweet, but I knew it was temporary. She was at home, poring over the HOA covenant, searching for any ammunition she could find. A defensive posture wasn't enough. I needed to escalate. I had to go on the offensive. Signs were good, but they were just propaganda. I needed infrastructure. I needed a physical presence. I realized with a flash of brilliance, campaign headquarters. This was beyond my DIY capabilities. This required a professional. I found Gus on a local community board online. His business was called Gus's Handyman Services, and his slogan was, "If it's broke, I'll fix it. If it ain't, I'll build you a new one." His profile picture was a grainy photo of a man who looked like he'd been carved from a block of granite and then left out in the sun for 60 years. He had more lines on his face than the HOA had rules. He was perfect. I called him, and an hour later, a beat-up Ford F-150 that looked like it had personally survived several demolition derbies rumbled to a stop in front of my house. Gus got out. He was exactly as advertised. Flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a deadpan expression that suggested he'd seen it all and been impressed by none of it. He walked onto my lawn, surveyed the Godzilla and Kong signs, and then turned his stony gaze to me. "You're the one on the phone." It wasn't a question. "That's me, Alex," I said, extending a hand. He gave it a single, firm shake that felt like it could recalibrate my spine. "Gus," he grunted. "What's the emergency? Your toilet backed up?" "No, nothing like that. The plumbing is thankfully fine. My project is exterior." I gestured grandly at the lawn. "I need you to build me a debate stage." Gus followed my gesture, his eyes scanning the space between the two signs. He was silent for a long, long time. He looked at the Godzilla sign. He looked at the Kong sign. He looked at the perfectly symmetrical shrubs. Then he looked back at me. His expression hadn't changed by a single millimeter. "Right," he finally said, the word doing the work of an entire paragraph. "So, here's what I'm thinking." I forged ahead, pulling out a sketch I'd made on a napkin. 2 podiums. Simple, sturdy, maybe a nice cedar. One here, I pointed, and one here. Campaign headquarters. And then behind them, I need frames, big ones, strong enough to hold up some large banners. Gus squinted at my napkin drawing. "Banners." "Cutouts, actually," I corrected. "Life-sized candidate cutouts." He stared at me. Just stared. The silence stretched. A bird chirped in a nearby maple tree, sounding entirely too cheerful for the gravity of this negotiation. I could feel him judging my life choices. Finally, he spoke. "You want me to build a debate stage?" he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "For a lizard and a gorilla." "An atomic lizard and a simian monarch," I clarified. "The distinction is important for the voters." Gus took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He looked at my house, then up at the sky, as if seeking guidance from a higher power. When his eyes met mine again, there was a flicker of something in them. It might have been amusement. It might have been pity. "Cash up front," he said, "and I'm not hauling away the dirt." "Deal!" Gus turned out to be a craftsman of the highest order. He worked with a silent, efficient competence that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. The sounds of saws and hammers soon became the new soundtrack of Maple Creek. As he built the podiums, he offered dry, unsolicited advice. "You're going to want to anchor the ape's frame with concrete footers," he grunted one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. "He's got a bigger wind profile. The lizard's more aerodynamic." "Good thinking, Gus. We need to ensure a level playing field." "Whatever you say, kid. It's your money." The construction did not go unnoticed by the enemy. Carol's patrols became more frequent, but she didn't approach me. She was clearly building her case, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension was palpable. The moment came on a Thursday evening. I was helping Gus level one of the main support posts for Kong's future cutout when the flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. A police cruiser, gliding silently toward my house. "Uh-oh," I said. Gus didn't even look up from his spirit level. "Figured they'd show up eventually." The cruiser pulled up to the curb. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a weary face and a mustache that had seen better decades. The other was younger, sharp, and looked like he was trying hard to maintain a professional demeanor. The setting sun glinted off their badges. The flashing red and blue lights cast a surreal, strobing glow over the half-finished podium and the Godzilla sign. It looked like a crime scene from another dimension. "Evening," the older officer said, his voice tired. He was clearly the alpha of this pair. His name tag read Miller. "We got a call about well, the call was a little confusing. A public disturbance?" "No disturbance here, officers," I said, trying to sound as normal as possible while standing next to a construction project dedicated to giant monsters. "Just a little home improvement." Officer Miller surveyed the scene. He looked at Gus, who gave him a curt nod. He looked at the podiums. He looked at the signs. His eyes lingered on the slogan, "A leader with heart and big hands." A corner of his mustache twitched. The younger officer, whose name tag read Chen, spoke up. "Sir, the complainant mentioned unauthorized construction and some kind of aggressive political rally." I had to hand it to Carol. She knew which buzzwords to use. "Aggressive? No," I said with a laugh. "Peaceful, absolutely peaceful. And, as I'm sure you can see, this is a non-partisan issue. We're just trying to get the word out." I gestured to the signs. "Feel free to take some campaign literature if you'd like. I have pamphlets." I did not, in fact, have pamphlets, but confidence was key. Officer Chen was now actively fighting a smile. He turned away slightly, pretending to inspect the tires of his cruiser. Officer Miller sighed, the sound of a man who was 2 years from retirement and had seen far too much weirdness in his career. "Son," he said, "a neighbor is claiming you're violating a local ordinance by running a political campaign from your front yard. An HOA ordinance, maybe," I countered. "But I'm not breaking any laws. I checked the city code. As long as the structures are under a certain height and not permanent, I'm in the clear. And unless Godzilla has recently declared his candidacy for city council, I'm not violating any election laws either." Miller looked at Chen. Chen gave a slight shrug. There was nothing they could do. My fortress of pedantry was holding strong. Miller spoke into the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Car 12. We're on scene at Maple Drive. It's a guy with monster signs. No laws being broken. Code 4. Advise the complainant that this is a civil matter. He clicked the radio off and looked at me. Try to keep the noise down, all right? And for the love of God, no actual atomic breath. You have my word, officer, I said solemnly. As they got back in their car, I heard Officer Chen finally let out the laugh he'd been holding in. Did you see the slogan about the big hands? He chuckled. Miller just shook his head as they drove away. Gus straightened up from his work. Cops are gone. Yep, I said, my heart soaring. This was a massive victory, public vindication. Good, Gus grunted, picking up his hammer. Means I can get back to work. This gorilla ain't gonna frame himself. The day the cutouts arrived was a day that would live in Maple Creek lore. They came in a massive, flat cardboard box delivered by a freight truck, the driver of which looked deeply confused as he read the address on the shipping label. This the monster place? He asked. The campaign headquarters, yes? I confirmed with a nod. The box was enormous and surprisingly heavy. Sarah came out to help me, and the two of us proceeded to engage in a 10-minute slapstick routine of trying to wrestle an 8-foot-tall, folded-up Godzilla out of my minivan. At one point, I was pinned against the garage door by a giant cardboard claw, and Sarah was laughing so hard she could barely stand. This is ridiculous, she gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. We look like idiots. We look like people committed to the democratic process, I grunted, finally freeing myself. With Gus's expert guidance, we got them unpacked and ready for the unveiling. They were magnificent. Printed on heavy-duty, all-weather vinyl, they were even more glorious than I had imagined. Godzilla was captured mid-roar, his dorsal fins glowing with atomic energy. Kong was beating his chest, a look of noble fury on his face. They were works of art. Hoisting them onto the frames Gus had built was a solemn ceremonial affair. Dave, from across the street, came over to help, and together, the three of us, the nerd, the handyman, and the IT guy, raised the Titans into place. We secured them with a frankly excessive number of zip ties and bolts. As Gus had warned, Kong had a serious wind profile. When we were done, we stepped back to admire our creation. It was beyond absurd. It had transcended mere lawn decoration and become a piece of full-blown installation art. Two massive, hyper-realistic monsters now loomed over my perfectly manicured lawn, standing behind their respective podiums. My house no longer looked like a house. It looked like the set for the world's strangest press conference. It's more than I ever dreamed, I said, a single tear of joy potentially rolling down my cheek. It's something, all right, Gus muttered, already packing his tools. His work was done, but mine was not. For the final touch, I brought out the big guns. I had purchased a set of solar-powered spotlights, which I strategically placed to give the candidates dramatic uplighting at night. And for the pièce de résistance, I hid a small, waterproof Bluetooth speaker behind a hibiscus bush. I connected it to my phone and, with a mischievous grin, queued up a sound file. A deafening, earth-shaking skreunk echoed through the tranquil suburban air. A few lights flicked on in neighboring houses. A small dog started barking frantically. Sarah came rushing to the front door. "Alex, what was that?" "Just testing the audio," I said. "I've set it to go off every hour, on the hour, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Community friendly." "You're a menace," she said, but she was grinning from ear to ear. "An absolute menace to neighborhood harmony." "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me," The reaction to the completed display was immediate and overwhelming. Traffic on our street picked up significantly. Teenagers started using my lawn as a backdrop for their TikTok videos. One enterprising family even had their family Christmas card photo taken in front of it, all of them wearing Team Kong t-shirts. My lawn had become a destination. Carol's reaction, however, was a masterclass in silent fury. I saw her on her walk the next morning. She didn't stop this time. She didn't slow down. But as she passed, her head was locked in my direction, her eyes wide with a kind of cosmic horror. She looked like she had just witnessed an elder god rising from the earth in the middle of a petunia bed. Her pace quickened, her power walk turning into a panic stomp as she retreated to her beige fortress to plot her final revenge. I knew the hammer was about to fall. And it did, 2 days later. It didn't come in a cream-colored envelope. It came via a certified mail carrier who required my signature. It was a thick packet of paper, cold and heavy in my hand. Inside was the official summons. Notice of violation and summons to appear before the Maple Creek Estates HOA Architectural Review Board. It was a declaration of war. I was being formally charged with a litany of violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. Violation of Bylaw 7C, lawn ornamentation. Display of non-standard, oversized, and thematically inappropriate lawn ornamentation. Violation of Bylaw 6A, structural additions. Erection of unapproved, non-permanent wooden structures, 2 podiums and 2 support frames, without prior written consent from the board. Violation of Bylaw 12D, nuisances. Creation of an auditory disturbance, intermittent monster roars, and an attractive nuisance causing increased vehicular and pedestrian traffic. And the grand finale, the catch-all clause she had threatened me with before. Violation of Bylaw 9A, community harmony. Engaging in behavior and property modification deemed detrimental to the aesthetic and harmonious character of the community. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. My presence was mandatory. I read the letter out loud to Sarah. She listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with each alleged infraction. "An attractive nuisance?" she said when I finished. "She's calling your masterpiece an attractive nuisance." "The nerve," I agreed. "She's throwing the whole book at me. This is it, the final showdown." "So what are you going to do?" she asked. A slow, determined smile spread across my face. I held up the summons. What any good candidate would do when faced with baseless attacks from a desperate opponent, I said. "I'm going to prepare for the debate." For the next 5 days, I was a man possessed. My office was no longer a campaign headquarters. It was a war room. I downloaded the entire 150-page Maple Creek Estates HOA covenant and bylaws document, a truly soul-crushing piece of literature, and read it cover to cover. I highlighted vague passages, contradictory rules, and undefined terms. Aesthetic, harmonious, appropriate, all subjective, all ripe for deconstruction. Sarah, who had fully transitioned from amused bystander to my co-conspirator, took on the role of my legal counsel. "Okay," she'd say, quizzing me over dinner. "She's going to hit you hard on the unapproved structures. What's your rebuttal?" "My rebuttal," I'd reply, pointing my fork at her, "is that the bylaw specifically refers to permanent additions affixed to the primary residence. My structures are freestanding and can be disassembled in under an hour. They are, legally speaking, elaborate birdhouses." She helped me craft my secret weapon, a PowerPoint presentation. It was my magnum opus, a work of art that blended corporate presentation slickness with utter, unhinged absurdity. I created charts and graphs. I embedded inspirational quotes about art and freedom of expression. The title slide, in a bold cinematic font, read, "Godzilla vs. Kong, a case study in apolitical community engagement and malicious compliance." By the time Wednesday evening rolled around, I was ready. I put on a blazer over a t-shirt, my serious but still creative look. I had my laptop, a laser pointer, and a folder full of printed-out bylaws with my notes scribbled in the margins. "Ready to go?" Sarah asked, giving my shoulder a squeeze. "As I'll ever be," I said. "It's time to face the board." We walked out the front door, and there they were, my two beautiful boys, illuminated by the spotlights, Godzilla and Kong, standing silent and proud, giving me all the moral support a man could ask for. I gave Kong's giant vinyl foot a little pat for good luck. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'll do you proud." The community clubhouse was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine. It was a single, cavernous room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly, pale glow on the dozen or so residents scattered among the folding chairs. It was the kind of room where joy goes to die. At the front, behind a long folding table draped with a cheap plastic tablecloth, sat the board, the tribunal. In the center was Carol, looking severe in a navy blue pantsuit, her clipboard placed squarely in front of her like a shield. To her right was a man named Gary, a meek, nervous-looking accountant who looked like he had been conscripted into this role against his will. To her left was a woman named Brenda, who had an air of profound boredom, as if she was mentally calculating how many episodes of a streaming show she could have watched in the time this meeting would take. Sarah and I took seats in the front row. A few neighbors gave me encouraging nods. Dave from across the street gave me a big thumbs up and mouthed, "Go get 'em." Deputy Mildred, sitting near the back, just glared. At 7 p.m. sharp, Carol banged a small gavel on the table. The sound was ridiculously loud in the quiet room. "This emergency session of the Maple Creek Estates Architectural Review Board is now in session," she announced, her voice tight and formal. "The sole item on the agenda is the property at 112 Maple Drive, owned by Mr. Alex Chen, regarding multiple and flagrant bylaw violations." She fixed me with a death stare. I gave her a small, polite smile. "Mr. Chen," she continued, "the board has received numerous complaints regarding the display on your front lawn. We have documented these violations and are here tonight to present our findings and render a decision, which will include substantial fines and a mandate for the immediate removal of all offending articles." She then spent the next 15 minutes presenting her case. It was a masterwork of petty tyranny. She had a laser pointer and a projector, and she clicked through a series of grainy, nighttime photos of my lawn, taken from behind that azalea bush. "Exhibit A," she said, pointing the red dot at one of the podiums. "An unapproved structure in clear violation of Bylaw 6A, which states..." She proceeded to read the bylaw in a droning monotone. "Exhibit B," she clicked to a picture of Godzilla's illuminated face. "Non-standard lawn ornamentation. Bylaw 7C is very clear on acceptable themes, which include seasonal decorations and small, unobtrusive statuary. A 2.5-meter tall atomic lizard does not, by any reasonable definition, qualify as unobtrusive." She went on and on, citing the traffic, the noise. She'd even recorded the hourly roar on her phone and played the tinny, distorted sound for the room. And finally the big one, the harmony clause. This spectacle," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, "has turned our quiet, harmonious community into a circus. It is tacky, it is disruptive, and it is detrimental to the aesthetic character we have all worked so hard to maintain. It is, in short, a nuisance." She finished her presentation, clicked off the projector, and folded her hands on the table. The board's position is clear. Mr. Chen, do you have anything to say in your defense before we vote on the fines? This was my moment. I do, Madam President, I said, standing up and walking to the front. In fact, I've prepared a short presentation. A murmur went through the small crowd. Carol's eyes narrowed. I connected my laptop to the projector. The title slide of my PowerPoint presentation filled the screen. Godzilla vs. Kong, a case study in apolitical community engagement and malicious compliance. I clicked my laser pointer on. Showtime. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice calm and confident. First, I'd like to thank the board for calling this meeting. It's heartening to know that our HOA is so deeply committed to upholding the standards of our community. I started with her first point. The board has cited Bylaw 6A regarding unapproved structures, an excellent point. However, if you read subsection 2, the bylaw specifically defines a structure as a permanent addition affixed to the primary residence or its foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, I clicked to the next slide, which showed a diagram of my podiums. My structures are freestanding. They are held in place by gravity and the sheer force of their own majesty. They are, from a legal and engineering standpoint, no different than an oversized, very elaborate bird bath. And as for the frames, a licensed contractor, Gus, assured me they are up to code and fully removable. I saw Gary, the accountant, nod slightly. He appreciated the technicality. Next, I tackled the ornamentation charge. Bylaw 7C, a fascinating read. It lists prohibited items, plastic flamingos, gnomes over 18 inches, and I quote, any statuary of a whimsical or startling nature. But it also lists approved items, decorations celebrating nationally recognized holidays, cultural events, or artistic expressions. I clicked to the next slide. It was a collage of movie posters for classic monster films. Godzilla and King Kong are not just monsters, they are cultural icons. They are cinematic legends with a combined filmography stretching back nearly a century. This isn't just a lawn display, it's a temporary art installation, a tribute to film history, an artistic expression. The boredom on Brenda's face was replaced by a flicker of interest. She was a film buff. I had her. Finally, I addressed the nuisance and harmony clause. This was the heart of it. The board claims my display is detrimental to community harmony. I must respectfully but wholeheartedly disagree. I clicked again. The screen filled with photos I'd taken over the past week. Kids laughing and pointing, the family in their Team Kong t-shirts, teenagers posing for selfies. This display hasn't created discord, I said, my voice rising with passion. It's created joy. It's started conversations. It's brought people together. It's made our little corner of the world a little less beige, a little more fun. I turned to face the audience. Dave, I said, pointing my laser pointer at him. Has my display brought you disharmony? Nope, Dave shouted from his seat. Woke my kid up from a nap with the roar once, but he loves it. Team Kong for life. A wave of laughter and applause rippled through the room. Carol banged her gavel. Order! Order! I delivered my closing argument. Look, I understand the spirit of the HOA rules. You want to maintain a certain standard. But when a rule is so vague and so broad that it can be used to punish creativity, to stifle a little harmless fun, then it's not a good rule. You banned political signs. I respected that. I didn't put up a single one. What I did was find a loophole. I celebrated something I love, and it turns out a lot of other people love it too. And if the price of living in Maple Creek is to have a lawn as bland and personality-free as a piece of drywall, then with all due respect, you can keep your harmony. I finished. The room was silent for a beat, and then a few people started clapping. Carol's face was stone. She was furious. She knew she'd lost the room. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Chen. The board will now vote." She looked at her fellow board members. "All in favor of levying the fines and mandating removal, say aye." She said aye, so loudly it was almost a shriek. She turned to Gary. The meek accountant looked down at his notes. He looked out at the faces in the crowd. He looked at me. He took a deep breath. I have to vote nay," he mumbled. His point about the definition of a permanent structure is technically sound. Carol's jaw dropped. She whipped her head towards Brenda. "Brenda?" Brenda, the bored one, just shrugged. "I abstain," she said, already checking the time on her phone. "I want to get home for the season finale of that new space show. Plus, the kid has a point about the artistic expression thing." One aye, one nay, one abstention. The motion failed. I had won. A cheer went up from Dave and a few others. Carol banged her gavel over and over, her face a mask of pure defeat. "This meeting is adjourned," she yelled. As people filed out, patting me on the back, I felt a sense of elation I hadn't felt in years. Sarah hugged me tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered. "My hero, the monster lawyer." We had fought the law, or at least the bylaws, and we had won. The days following the HOA showdown were different. A palpable shift had occurred in the neighborhood's atmosphere. My lawn was no longer just a quirky display. It was a landmark, a symbol of a small, ridiculous victory against petty bureaucracy. The car traffic didn't die down. If anything, it increased. I saw people from the next town over driving by slowly, pointing, taking pictures. I was the proprietor of a local tourist attraction. Carol's reign of terror was effectively over. She still did her morning power walks, clipboard in hand, but the walks were faster now, her gaze fixed firmly on the pavement in front of her. When she passed my house, she'd angle her body away, as if looking directly at the monsters might turn her to stone. She hadn't lost her title, but she had lost her power. The aura of untouchable authority was gone, replaced by the quiet humiliation of being outmaneuvered by a graphic designer and two giant movie monsters. The tape measure stayed in its holster. An uneasy truce settled over Maple Creek Estates. I, in a gesture of goodwill, and because Sarah was getting tired of the hourly roars, disabled the speaker. The visual spectacle remained, but the auditory assaults ceased. A week after the meeting, Dave from across the street came over while I was watering the flowers. He was carrying 2 bottles of beer. "To the victor," he said, handing one to me. "That was the most exciting HOA meeting I have ever attended. I mean, it was the only HOA meeting I have ever attended, but the point stands. It was legendary." We clinked our bottles. "Thanks, Dave. Couldn't have done it without your moral support." "Hey, we're neighbors," he said with a grin. He looked over at his own immaculate lawn. "You've inspired me, you know. I'm thinking of starting my own campaign." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Who's your candidate?" He winked. "Let's just say I'm exploring a run for a certain Queen of the Monsters. She's got a strong pro-environment platform." The next morning, a small, tastefully printed sign appeared on his lawn. It featured a delicate, glowing silhouette of a giant moth. The text read, "Mothra, a write-in candidate for the people." The story ends a few months later, as summer begins to fade into autumn. The movie has come out. The hype has died down. It felt like time. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, with a little help from Dave, I took the Titans down. The lawn felt strangely empty without them, like a stage after the actors have taken their final bow. I neatly folded the vinyl cutouts and stored them in the garage, ready to be deployed again should tyranny ever rear its ugly head. That evening, Sarah and I were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, The fescue grass was exactly 3 inches high. It was the same scene as that first day, but it felt different. It felt earned. "You know," Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I kind of miss them." "Me too," I admitted. "It's too quiet." But our work was not quite done. The next morning I went out to the garage, pulled out a hammer, and walked to the small flower bed near our mailbox. I planted one last sign in the soft earth. It was a small one, no bigger than a dinner plate. It was a simple, elegant design I'd made, showing the silhouettes of both Godzilla and King Kong, not fighting, but shaking hands. Below the image, the text was simple and direct. "Co-presidents, for a stronger Maple Creek." We had found our paradise after all. We just had to fill it with monsters first, to remind everyone that even in the most manicured, beige-tinted corners of the world, there's always room for a little bit of glorious, harmonious chaos.